So what we're saying was that basically, in our simulation studies, the more highly correlated bordering lead, the more you are to win. Right. This is a very early. This is an indication that this is unfair. Right. There's a skill that by winning this sort of 2/3, you're giving the bordering and lead climbers a bigger advantage. Right. Oh boy. Okay, and so then we also looked at like for what was the probability of qualifying, and for finals, what's the probability of winning a medal if you won any of the events, right? So if you win any event, what's the probability that you qualify, and what's the probability that you win a medal in the finals? And this is all based on those assumptions about correlation. What's the correlation in this simulation, Kwong? Any idea for these results? I don't remember either, but there was some correlation, and these were the finals. So basically, if you win an event, you have a very high likelihood of moving on to. You can see the rank bar of 8. If you win any of the events, you're probably going to qualify, but you're less likely to win a medal if you win an event. You have to really do more than just win one event. These are the placement scores. We wanted to know like if our assumptions were correct about uniform stuff. What was the score that would sort of get you to the next round? We found that a score of 453 would usually get you into the top 8, and then in the finals, scores of things like 9, 19, and 33 were around the averages for gold, silver, and bronze. Just to give you some sort of idea about the scale of what these scores need to be to qualify or to move on. Okay, I think this is the more interesting stuff than that simulation study. This is a correlation analysis that we did. We really wanted to know about what is the correlation between bouldering and lead. We assumed it was true because of this, but let me show you actually what this looks like. So correlation between the overall rank and the ranks of the individual disciplines. Here's a case study that we're going to use. We're going to use Tokyo 2020 women's qualification. So what we're looking at is what is the correlation between your overall rank and the rank within an individual discipline. If the rank in the individual discipline is very highly correlated with your overall rank, that means that that's relatively more important to your overall rank, right? And so what we can see here is that for bouldering and lead, we get a Kendall for bouldering and lead, we get a Kendall's tau of about 0.4 with very significant p-values, and for speed, it's basically not significant. What this is saying is that if you are doing well in bouldering and lead individually, you're more likely to do well overall. Right, so speed is sort of like this. It's like this event that gets thrown in, and it's really it's hard to do well overall if you're only good at speed, right? So it is kind of screwing the people who are speed specialists, which is a complaint that we heard. We can to visualize the underlying correlations that exist among climbing discipline performances. We use speed race time. You have to use something called tops in bouldering. In bouldering, there's different like puzzles, and you can score tops, and then there's these intermediate scores, and we used that as a measure for how good you did in the event. And for lead, it's the number of holds. So we have data that looks like this, where you have for speed, you have the tops, and then you have the lead holds, and these are all scored differently. And so we were looking at correlations between these. If you do a principal component analysis on these, so this is a weird place to do principal components because it's usually a high-dimensional technique. We're looking at 3 different dimensions, but what you get is on this bar plot, you see that leads and bouldering are perfectly correlated, and they're very, very independent of speed. And this is exactly what the speed climbers were like complaining, and it was a valid complaint, right? This skill is so different than these skills, right? And they've weighted this twice as heavily as they did for speed, all right? The competition form is stacked against speed climbers. This is what I think is the most interesting, is the leave one climber analysis. So what my question was, I'll just go to the next slide and explain it. What happens to the overall rankings if one climber is disqualified? So in particular, we're looking at what if one of the medalists was qualified. So there's this concept called the independence of relevant alternatives. And what this basically says is that ranking in a competition should not depend on the inclusion or exclusion of someone else, right? And so if you have a good scoring system, it shouldn't matter whether someone else competed or didn't compete. Your performance should be the same regardless of what other people are doing. So we wanted to check and see if there was violations of the independence of irrelevant alternatives, the IA assumption. And so what we did is we basically said, let's remove an individual, leave all the other individuals with the same score, and see would the rankings change. Should the ranking change? No. For the same performance, if someone just was removed or disqualified, right, you then change the ranks because that person was removed, but the overall ranking should not change if you have a good scoring system. Well, there's evidence of violation in the real data. So let's look at this plot. I think this picture is my favorite picture, and I think this is crazy that this happened at the Olympics. So what we're saying here is this is the actual final ranks of the women in 2020. These were the scores and these were the ranks. So what we wanted to do is, let's take an individual climber out of it. So in this one, if we removed the person who finished first, how would the ranks change? You basically just everyone shifts down, nothing changes. The ones that are highlighted with the boxes, there is a rank that changes. So in this case, what we're saying is, if the person who finished second was removed from the competition, and the remaining 5 people had the exact same performances, based on the changing of the ranks in the individual events, positions 4 and 5 would have flipped. Not that big a deal, no numbers were changed. All right? But look at this one right here. This is the top 6. If the person who was 5th simply was disqualified and they re-ranked everyone with the same exact performance, the person who finished 4th would have gone up to a silver medal. With the exact same performance, simply removing someone would have taken this person from 4th to a silver medal, and this person would have dropped down to bronze, and this person would not have won a medal. This is insane, right? Your score is being, like, a major life accomplishment is being affected by this ranking system, by this scoring system based on ranks, right? And just simply removing someone, it shouldn't change your it's the exact same performance. So it shouldn't change where you're ranked in the final standings, and yet it was changing the performance. And this isn't theoretical, right? This isn't like this theoretical violations of IA. This is a real example of if you simply remove this person. So imagine you go from the 20 qualifiers, the top 8 people qualify, and then someone gets hurt. Now there's only 7 people left. That's a real situation that could happen. This is sort of the situation we're working with. The leave one would be like, someone got hurt, we remove them, how does the ranks change with the exact same performance? That's crazy this happened at the Olympics. Anyway, I think that's really interesting. Takeaways. So the idea of a climbing triathlon gives speed climbers a huge disadvantage. The IA was violated, which is an issue of ranked product scoring. A solution to this might be 1 set of medals for speed and 1 set of medals for bouldering and lead, which I believe, Elliot, is what's happening.
Correct.
This is what's going to happen in 2024. Oh, that's on the next bullet point. It is confirmed that Paris 2024, there'll be 2 sets of medals, lead and bouldering combined speed only events. You know, and here are the 2 people I worked with. This is Kwon, he's right there. And then there's Hannah, she's a PhD student at Colorado State. And this is how this started. I think this is informative because, so this, I literally tweeted at Kwon, or maybe it's a DM, but I said, yo, it's a tweet. You have an idea for quick, there's a note in a week, any interest? And then, that's my old Twitter before it was banned by Elon. And so it started with this tweet, and then we eventually wrote a paper, and we submitted it to the Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics competition. But this is how papers like this start. Just you see something, think about it, write it down, and then see where it goes. And you know, not every tweet that becomes a paper, but some of them do. And you just get these ideas and see where they go. And then Kwon wrote a series of blog posts, and then Kwon has added this to the last slide. Oh, this is from UCSAS 2021. And then here's the links for contacting Kwon or myself. And then he absolutely put this in here. You put yourself, Kwon? Yeah, okay. Okay, that's it. How much time am I done?
Do you want to talk more? I don't know.
Aren't you keeping the time or something? Oh. I have 5 more minutes. I did short. That's never happened before.
Including Q&A or not including Q&A?
Okay, good. That time back. Yeah, I'm not going to call on you. You can talk to me in the office.
Like, what happened when you tried comparing the product rank versus the sum rank? Like, did people's results change like when you did a summer pathway? Well,
Did we do some rank? I don't know. We looked at it very early on and found that it wasn't as interesting.
Yeah.
So this is several years ago. If I remember correctly, we looked at it. I believe it will still violate the IIA, but they're not nearly as drastic.
oh, I mean, like, let's say that hypothetically you were to pretend that sport planning used a sum rank system. Would you would the results of the Olympics be changed if you switched from a product to a sum rank?
Yeah, so I think the answer is yes, but I don't think it's nearly as drastic, right? Like, it's well known. There's a whole bunch of literature in sports economics about the violations of IIA in like cross country, but it's harder to find real examples of them. I think with sport climbing, it's going to be, or with the rec product, it's very easy to find examples where this goes wrong, because the scoring system. It's so extreme. If you finish first, when you multiply by 1, it stays the same, right? And so it's a much more extreme. There's an extreme prize for finishing first, whereas in a sum, finishing first isn't nearly as valuable as finishing first in a sum versus a rank. So that's what I think, if I remember from 4 years ago. Elliot.
I have a few comments, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. You're gonna take me down now?
No, I'm
Oh,
going
okay.
to build you up.
Okay.
So I just looked at the results of sport climbing from Tokyo, and all 3 men's medalists won one of the 3 segments. So making your point, like each one of them earned a 1.
Yeah,
And that
it was
medal.
was the bronze medalist the speed climber?
Let's see.
We looked at other events, and we found it was really hard to. So the junior events, there was qualifying events, and we found it was really hard to win as a speed climber at these events. We were seeing it, and so we were surprised that the speed climber actually did place in the men's side. In the women's side, none of those 3 for whatever reason. And okay.
I can talk to you more later. I have another example
Sure.
for you.
I gotta go. She's
Yeah.
intimidating me off the.
Okay, same.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, one more round of applause. Next up, we have Monnie McGee from SMU. She's going to talk about the recruitment element of the sophomore team.
Sorry. No problem. Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Okay, testing. Can everybody hear me? Is the mic seem to be working? Okay, cool. A little closer. All right, let's see. It was better after you lowered it? Okay, how's that? Is that better?
Yeah, let's people on.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can people online hear me? Something. Okay, great.
Just the way. I'm sorry. If there's any issues.
Once I can use my teacher voice. That would help. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for being here and crowding this room. This is really great to see this many people interested in Olympic sports. This paper, this work has actually been published in the American Statistician, and that QR code there will take you to the paper in which most of what you see here, or a section of what you see here, is written up. This is track and field, of course, is the original Olympic sport. However, I am doing it at the high school level. So, however, this does have implications for potential college recruitment, which might have implications for Olympics in the future. So track and field is extremely popular. There are greater than 1 million high school track and field athletes, and that is a 2019 number. It's probably larger now. I'm sure it went down a little bit with COVID and came back up again. Track field was one of the top 3 most watched Olympic sports in Rio, and the second most watched sport in the Tokyo Olympics. Can anyone guess what the other two are of the top three that are watched on television? Spectators. Gymnastics is one. Swimming, yes, okay. I should have brought fabulous prizes for you, but I'm sorry, you just get to know that you got it right, okay? And there were over 20 million viewers in these sports. So this is a really important sport, and it deserves some attention as far as some data analytics going with it. So my inspiration for this is the girl on the left in this photo. This is a 200-meter dash in a track meet. She does actually wind up winning. She pulls ahead at the very end, makes it all very exciting. But athletic scholarships are perceived as a path to college education, and that's why I wanted to look at high school scores and seeing how they might lead to college scholarships and later, or what about a high school athlete can help a college coach in their recruiting. But there's a lot of aspects to this, and I don't intend to say that I have answered the question. So if you go to any high school track meet, this is how this started. So like Greg started with a tweet, mine started with conversations at a track meet. Typically, if somebody says something like this, after you watch a few races, girls don't get any faster after their sophomore year, especially for distance events. So this begs the question on whether or not boys actually improve their times after their sophomore year. And so this is where the notion of the sophomore peak comes from. Sophomore being 10th grade in what we're talking about here. Now I have this picture here because this is the Tokyo Olympics. Allison Felix in the foreground is about 32 years old in this photo. Sydney McLaughlin in the background is about 22 years old. Okay, so there's a 10-year difference in these athletes, but they are performing at the same level. I suppose one could argue that Allison Felix may be past her peak at this point, but I would think that her medals at the Tokyo Olympics might beg to differ with that. So I know that individual performance in athletes is very, well, it's individual. So, so we wanted to look at that and also look on the impact on recruitment for college. I believe, by the way, Allison Felix still holds the 200-meter high school record. At least that was true about 4 years ago in 200-meter dash. So recruiting rules, college recruiting can occur on June 15th after the completion of the sophomore year. And my question was, is the focus on athletes who have already peaked? So if there is a sophomore peak, then we need to know that. And if the athletes who are recruited have already peaked, what are the implications of that for the college sport? And the relationship is, there's also this relationship between growth rate and improvement, which is understood but not necessarily implemented by coaches. So that people grow at different rates. We know that, right? So, and also people get better at their sport at different rates. So you might have someone who doesn't peak, say, until their senior year, who is completely overlooked by somebody who, by college coaches, because they are thinking about the younger players and potential, or younger athletes. So the literature focus on this, though, has been in peak performance in college. There's a lot of literature on that. Most of the literature, though, is on peak performance for elite athletes in general. So not just for your person who's going to participate in high school potentially and not go forward, but also for peak performance. So these are people in the Olympics or other world-class athletes. And of course, we find in most of those studies, they pretty much all agree that between the ages of about 25 and 30 is where people peak in their sport. And there is a little bit of wiggle room there, and it also depends on the sport. So more explosive sports, people tend to peak younger. The sports that require a little more skill and technique, those people tend to peak a little bit later in their sport. But again, there's not much been done for sports. The evidence for peak performance in adolescence is based on adolescent athletes, elite adolescent athletes. So it doesn't really apply, again, to, in general, a high school athlete or an adolescent athlete. And that's the reference for that paper down there. I didn't have anything to do with that paper. That was a very interesting paper that was part of this particular journey. So I do want to mention here that there obviously is an effect of puberty on athletic performance. Individuals mature at different rates. Obviously, you have a boy, for example, who at 14, when he's starting high school, is 5'0" and 100 pounds. And then by the time he's a senior, he's 6'1", 170. That's a very different, I mean, that's of course, obviously going to be a change in the way that that person might perform at a particular sport. And typically with women, it's seen as a detriment to their sport performance. They get hips, they don't run as fast, their body mass changes. It's really hard for them to continue in their sport at the same level. At least that's where the myth of the sophomore peak, I think, comes from. I do want to mention the female triad here because I do think it's important, and I don't want to gloss it over, but my data does not have any information on the female triad. The female triad is this notion of low energy and menstrual disturbance, and also low bone and mineral density that tends to affect a large proportion, according to this little graphic, about 78% of female athletes. So again, it's an important issue, but my data do not address that issue. So my 3 questions are, do boys and girls peak in speed at different grades during high school? And is there any difference in those peaks due to gender or interaction between gender and their distance? And in this particular paper, I looked at 200 meter, 400 meter, 800 meter, and 1600 meter events. And one of the most common trajectories of finishing times for track athletes across their high school careers. This last question came later as I identified or started looking more closely at the data. We have a ton of data for this. If you didn't know, track and field has a lot of websites where you can get data. These are 2, a Mile Split and it's a Mile Split Texas in particular, but it's Mile Split USA, and there's a Mile Split Arizona and a Mile Split Florida. There's a bunch of different mile splits, and they have a lot of information. Athletic.net in particular actually has the numbers on their website, so they have over 85,000 coaches participating in this, around 8 million entries per year, and over 13,000 events. So it is a ton of data waiting to be utilized for this. And it goes from middle school all the way up to college in some instances. It also is across the US and across events. There's a cross country as well as track and field. It tracks the running events, the throwing events, the jumping events. So it's all there. And there's also TFERS, which is for college as well. I didn't utilize TFERS in this particular study. So we had to scrape these data. So this is a snapshot of athletic.net in particular. That's the one we wound up scraping. You can see that it's divided into regions. This is Texas, region 1 to 4. There's actually 8 regions in Texas. There's men's top athletes at the top, women's performance list, all those things. You can get from there, you can go drill down into a specific high school in a specific season, and then you can find all of the athletes that are in that high school in that given season. You can also look at the particular race you're interested in or the event you're interested in, men's 100 meters varsity, women's 100 meters varsity, for example. Drill down into that and get rankings and other scores. You can get scores per meet and all kinds of stuff from this. So there's a lot of information here. Now, scraping these data took the majority of the time, obviously, and the cleaning of it as well. This was before ChatGPT could clean your data for you. So we did all this using by hand and a lot of regex expressions and RVest and a few curse words thrown around, mostly at the computer. But anyway, that part was difficult, and we do have the data, and I have the data that I used. If you go to the website for the paper, there's a link there to a GitHub site that has all of the data that I used for this in cleaned form, by the way. So this is what we came up with. What we wound up with for this paper, we looked at athletes that completed 4 years in the same event. And this is from 5A and 6A Texas high schools. 5A and 6A schools in Texas are the largest high schools. They have over 1,500 students per class. And these are the numbers of the records. I won't bother reading them for you. You can read them yourselves. We do have very few records for the 800 meter. And again, we had the stipulation that an athlete had to compete in all 4 years in that race. And that's a very tough event. So that's probably why we have so few records in that one. Oh, well, I just almost stole my own thunder, but let me go back to this. So we want to take these records and examine the sophomore peak. The idea being that if we examine change from year to year and look at the percentage of, say, personal records that an athlete that happen in each of these events from year to year, then we should see the largest percentage of personal records in the sophomore year if the sophomore peak is correct, if it's true. Drum roll, please. We don't see that. Okay. What we see is, so for every event and both genders, we see that the percentage of personal records increases as the years go on. And this tracks more with what we know about the data from elite athletes and college athletes than previously, because this is the, this kind of goes with that notion that people are still improving as they're staying with it. And these athletes, again, are the oldest of them is probably 19 years old. So they have a long way to go, hopefully, to improve their craft a little bit more. We also looked at means plus 95% confidence intervals for the percent change between grades and overall. So in this particular graphic, I have the overall is on the far right, and you can see that the vertical axes here are percent changes. At zero's up here at the top. So a negative change indicates an increase in speed or a decrease in time, however you want to look at it, an improvement if you want to talk about it that way. And we have from 9th to 10th, 10th to 11th. So the 10th to 11th would be the relevant one. And you can see that athletes are still decreasing their speeds, although perhaps not as quickly. And by the 11th and 12th, there's a very little change in speed. But overall, you see there's obviously a big difference in their improvement for both boys and girls in this. The girls are in pink and the boys are in blue here on this one. But this is for the group as a whole. So this is an average looking at every difference in grade as its own value, as its own independently of the other grades. I really wanted to look at what about trajectories? So this doesn't connect individual athletes over time. It just looks at them independently. So I wanted to connect them over time. And here I'm just going to look at the 1600 meter run as an example of what we did. We did this for all 4 events that we looked at, but this is the 1600 meter run. And the vertical axes here are inverted so that better times are at the top. And there's boys on the right and girls on the left. And you can see much more variance for the girls. If you look at that solid red line in the middle, that is the linear regression line that is done for all of these. So you can kind of see what the average looks like. Note that that slope is mostly increasing or is increasing. So that means an improvement overall in the high school trajectories. Now, you see the very light kind of grayish brownish shading in the back. That's all of the athletes in the 1600 meter. The darker brown lines are just 10 random that I picked out to show what typical trajectories might look like. And you can see that there's a lot of improvement, but there's some that don't as well. What you don't see is a distinct peak at the sophomore year and then a plateau. You might see kind of more of a gradual shaping, but for a lot of these athletes, they are still getting better as they get out of their high school careers. So looking at that, all of those plots, we've got different slopes and different intercepts. So I thought I'd do a mixed model analysis to see if we could glean anything more from this, to actually look at the effect of grade on them. That's a fixed effect, and the grade squared, which will quantify the peak. So of course, my time is in seconds. We did this for each event and for both genders separately, so separate mixed effect models. And actually, I have to say that this was an idea from the reviewers that we did this. So, and that turned out to be a really good thing, actually. So this is the model setup. And then for the random intercept model, I'm just going to look at 200 meter and 1600 meter here. And the coefficient, as you note on the year for all of these, is negative. So we have girls and boys, again, analyzed separately for both the 1600 meter and the 200 meter. We don't really see an evidence of the peak. The year has a much larger t-statistic than the year squared, meaning it's more important. And I actually did at one point take out the year squared, and the Riemel statistic for this was actually a little bit larger without year squared, but it was not that much difference. So you could take out that and still have roughly the same model. So if you want to do parsimony, you could say year squared is not really necessary for this. But what's really remarkable about this is if you look at the interclass correlation coefficients, they are enormous. They're close to 1. What does that say? That means the individual variability is really taking over in this model. And so in some sense, the notion of trying to say that there's one paradigm, the sophomore peak, that fits all high school athletes is moot, because it's really more about individual variability. So back to our 1600 meter runs again. So we wanted to ask, fine, we can't say anything about the sophomore peak. We can't really say anything about peak in general. So what about clusters of athletes who perform similarly? That's what we want to look at. But we want to cluster them over their trajectory. So this is time series clustering, and we're going to use the KML-R package. It's basically clustering with using k-means for longitudinal data. That's where k means longitudinal. That's where that comes from. It does not assume a functional form of trajectories. So for example, it doesn't assume a linear form, so it's a non-parametric clustering. And we chose our clusters via cross-validation for each event and each gender separately. So I'm going to show you the results for the 200 meter boys and girls and the 1600 meter boys and girls. So 200 meter is up here at the top and 1600 meter at the bottom, boys on the left in red, girls on the right in purple. And these clusters, so these lines, each line represents a cluster of individuals within the particular trajectories in their high school. So now these times on the vertical axis, they're not inverted. So performance at the bottom is better in this case. And you can see though, what we do see is that athletes that tend to start fast tend to stay fast. They're at least in the fastest group. There are not a whole lot of switching groups. So as a college coach, you might look at somebody who's like a boy in the 400 meter. I'm sorry, this is not 200 meter, that's 400 meter on the top. And a 200 meter time of 60 seconds would be really bad. This is 400 meter. So you see someone in this bottom line here that they have 52 seconds as their start time, and then they're down below 50 seconds by the time they're a senior. That's a really good athlete. Of course, as a coach, you want to try to catch that person as early as possible. So how do you predict that athlete is going to stay there or wind up in this group, which has roughly the same intercept, but a little bit different slope? So that's another question to be answered later on. So limitations, takeaways, this is always the thing that we need to think about. I don't really see evidence of a sophomore peak, maybe a junior peak, and honestly, these athletes in general, high school athletes, seem to be improving over time, which meshes more with the literature that we know about performance and human performance in general for running and throwing events. So this might be an opportunity to use some of these data to hold off and maximize scholarships. I'm not saying that I don't have an app or a shiny app or anything like that a college coach could use yet to look at this, but maybe that's something for the future. Some limitations, we only used Texas and we only have gender, well, we have high school and region of the state as other variables, but we don't have any other demographic variables, for example, their height or their weight or anything like that, that we might be able to use to improve the model. I suppose that we would get it, but it would be at a lot of human effort to try to get that information. And I mentioned here that Texas is the #2 recruiting state for college track and field. So it's the second most number of athletes from Texas that wind up in running in college, at least in D1. Anyone guess what #1 is? So audience participation time again. Nope.
Florida.
Nope. Georgia.
What?
Yeah, Georgia's #1. Okay, again, sorry, no fabulous prize for you, but you just get to know that you won. The other ones, Florida is #3. And I believe this is going to surprise you, Iowa and Pennsylvania. Okay, so at least that's according to MileSplit a couple of years ago. Maybe it's a little bit different now. Anyway, so for the future, jumps and throws, same girl here doing a triple jump. So I'm very interested in the jumps and the throws as well. And also doing this, what I told you earlier about this idea of where we have backward analysis using record linkage. So let's take the top college performers that get championship rings, or they win their conferences, and backtrack them through their high school career to see where they were. And that's what we're working on right now. Hopefully we'll have something for you by JSM. So I'm going to leave it there, but I do want to mention a couple of things at SMU. We have some positions open, and so I would love for you to join us at SMU Statistics and Data Science. Come talk to me. We have an open rank position, a full professor chair position, endowed chair position open, and a lecture position also. And this is our solar eclipse on Monday, taken from the Dallas Hall lawn right in front of SMU. And that is Peruna, our fearsome mascot, wearing his eclipse glasses and staying safe. Okay, anyway, thank you very much.
You want
Yeah.
to answer some questions?
Okay, so if you have
No time for questions. Yeah.
later. Next up, we have Dr. Elliot Schwartz from the USOC. He is going to speak on using analytics to drive competitive success for U.S. Olympic athletes and national governing bodies. Elliot, am I allowed to use it?
Absolutely. Emily's Canadian, but we're friends. At least in some sports.
Yeah.
You do. I'll just start talking while Drew sets up.
Don't get the mic.
Oh, yeah, Mike.
Right here.
Oh, thanks. Just clip this and hold it.
Yes.
So it should be the one time.
James, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Any other, is there any way we can get more chairs in the room? I know we have,
Yeah.
let's do that now while we set up. And I'll just start talking a little bit to entertain everyone. Thanks. Hi, Lou. Nice to see you.
Maybe I can answer questions.
Oh,
Question?
I have a
Yeah.
question. So you mentioned like this research may lead to have confidence make you more to make decisions. But I wrote like in the second part, like you do certain aspect, you'll find out. Sorry, please clarify if I understand wrong. It's like there's no crossover. So the blue ones are going to be blue ones. So if there's no crossover, they already know they're good in the first year. They should have lost in that essence, right? Instead of waiting.
Well, I mean, those are means, right? So I didn't really have individual trajectories of athletes over that. So it's possible that there might be someone who's in that smaller group that, I mean, things can happen, but yeah, that is possible. I think I would want to do this sort of analysis on more states and more data before I actually could make that recommendation. But it does seem true that somebody who starts out running 400 meters at 70 seconds is not going to be D1 qualifier by the time they're senior. So that's something you can.
Are we in business? Do folks have seats? I think we're
done
good.
setting up. Or do you have any more questions?
We're good?
Okay.
All right,
So
great.
over here, does anybody need to?
I think everyone's seated. No, yeah, the guys have seats. All right. Thanks, Monnie. All right, who's the schedule enforcer? Who's timing me? Yeah, okay, and what do I have, 20 to talk and 5 for Q&A? Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you time me for
There's 22 minutes.
22 minutes? All right, so time me for 18, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. All right. All right, so I work at the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. That is the U.S. organization that's responsible for fielding teams for the Olympics, Paralympics, Pan Am Games, and Parapan Games. And we work with all of our national governing bodies across the country to field those teams. So pick your favorite Olympic or Paralympic sport. Like the national governing bodies are like USA Swimming, USA Gymnastics, USA Fencing, etc. Okay. I work on a team called Performance Innovation. We've come together in the last few years, so it's basically Nerds Are Us. It's we are working in data, analytics, and technology to support athlete health, wellness, and performance. That's our objective. We have, you can see a fancy purpose there, lots of words. You can read those later. Strategically, we're trying to give competitive advantage to our Team USA athletes. So our goal as an organization is to make sure that we are the best performance innovation organization, sorry, Canada, when we host the Summer Olympics and Paralympics in LA in 2028. The three main pillars of our organization are the development of a platform called Athlete 360, which is an athlete management system, or AMS. So if you ever hear AMS as a buzzword, just think one-stop shopping for all data that relates to an athlete. And it's sort of a holy grail for all organizations. There are some commercial companies offering solutions. The situation is kind of like, it's for everyone, which means it's sort of for no one because it's not customized for anybody, but customization goes on, but it's a big effort to create an AMS. So we're working with an AMS partner to develop our system, and then with customization for us, and a lot of other organizations are doing the same thing. The other next pillar is international competitive analytics. So thinking about what Esteban talked about this morning, that's all about understanding how good are we compared to other countries. So we have models for every Olympic event. And we basically look at the teams or the competitors in those events and what are their expectancies or likelihoods to win medals at the Olympics. And we update those based on international competitive results. And I'll talk about an aspect of competitive analytics that I'm involved with in my work here. The final pillar is technology and innovation. So we operate a fund national governing bodies can apply for, and we also support them in executing those projects. But it's basically extra funding to do projects that relate to supporting athletes, technique, health, wellness, performance, etc. Some of the challenges and opportunities that we have in our Olympic and Paralympic movement in the U.S. First one is resources. So we are not like some countries that have a state-sponsored sports system. Money is tight, and most NGBs are decentralized. So we do not receive funding from the U.S. government. Our funding comes from generous donors and from our television contract with NBC primarily. So money is always at a premium. We also have a smaller organization than you might imagine. Our national governing bodies have variable budgets and staff sizes. So some of them, like USA Swimming or USA Track and Field, large organizations, a lot of members, relatively well-funded, and their staffs will include people working in the analytics and technology spaces. Other NGBs are more like high school or small college programs where there's a handful of people doing everything, probably no one with any data analytics or technology capacity or capabilities. So it's a real gamut of different capabilities and capacities that we support. There are many sports and events. So in the Paris Olympics, we have 329 medal events in 45 sports. So imagine like a whole bunch of world championships going on all at the same time. And then the Paralympics will have even more medal events in 23 sports. And Paralympics, they often change classifications. So they classify athletes based on their limitations or capabilities in movement. And those classifications are often changing. So it makes data collection and analytics really challenging in that space. And that's something that we're trying to overcome. Getting into data now. So like we heard Esteban talk about Hawkeye today. Some of the other ones that the different major sports leagues have are like Zebra, Sport Radar, etc. Second Spectrum. We don't have any of that. We don't have high-res cameras or 19 high-res cameras. around our arenas. We don't have easy means to do like ball tracking or real-time player tracking data. So it's a space that we're trying to develop, but it's a much harder effort for us. We don't have what the major leagues have. Another challenge is relatively few data points because many athletes in many sports don't compete all that often. Our data supplier is GraceNote, which used to be known as Infostrata. They give us data, to their credit, on all Olympic sports, but the nature of the data we have is what I would call like metadata. It's basically athlete and team names, what country they represent, birth dates, competition type, the sport event, who won, who lost, what was the rank, what was the result, if it's measurable, that kind of stuff. Competition results are often presented in a PDF format, like I talked about with Zheng's great work. So we have to do a lot of scraping. And then finally, video tagging, which is really the means that you would take to really understand like what goes into a performance, is time consuming, expensive, and subject to imperfect reliability. So we're very interested in automated video tagging solutions. That is surprisingly a much more difficult problem than I originally thought. And I think a lot of people underestimate how difficult that is to get it right. That doesn't mean we're not trying. So the type of competitive analytics that we do, or at least some examples here at the USOPC and the data sources. One main type of analytics we do is ELO ratings. Who knows where ELO comes from? Chess, good job. So ELO comes from chess. So it's basically a way of looking at head-to-head matchups and basically doing a point exchange. So if someone beats somebody else, they take ranking points from them, and it's a way of understanding the relative strengths of different athletes in an event. We've taken that for head-to-head and adapted it for multi-competitor events in order to understand an athlete or a team's strength relative to other international competitors. Our initial data source is that GraceNote that I talked about, and we basically use that to calculate ELO ratings over time, and then use that to calculate, with a closed form expression, how that translates to medal expectancy. We also do some Monte Carlo simulation around that to figure it out. So that's row 3. We use Monte Carlo simulations around those ELO ratings to, again, estimate our medal expectancies. Another way we use those ELO ratings is for what we call performance funnels. So, Monnie, I'm really interested in talking to you more because that basically relates to looking at how athletes progress over time and what their peak ages are. And it's a really important tool for funding, like understanding when someone's peak is likely to be. I think we have a tendency to reward athletes for past performance, and I think we see that in major league sports as well. And I think it'd be interesting to flip that on its ear and find a way to look at athletes as they progress, because once an athlete has won a gold medal, they're going to get sponsorships, they're going to get resources, they're going to have a lot of funding. It's the athlete on the way up who is unfunded or underfunded who I think we should be supporting in order to help them maximize their potential. So, Monnie, really want to talk to you more about that because that's fascinating work. Another aspect of Monte Carlo simulations than what I'm going to talk about today is, instead of using ELO ratings to predict medal expectancies, I've developed an approach to using competition results in order to basically run a bunch of Monte Carlo simulations and look at potential outcomes as well as what needs to be true for an athlete or a team to win in a given event. And I'll illustrate that with an example from gymnastics today. If you're interested in seeing more, I gave a similar presentation at the Sloan conference this year, focused primarily on figure skating results. So if you want to see that, shameless plug, go to YouTube and you can find me. And then finally, simple is gap analysis. Part of understanding how we compare is just looking at different aspects of a performance and understanding how our athletes compare to international competitors in each of those categories. And that comes from utilizing data available in detailed results protocols. So an example in figure skating might be comparing athletes on the points they're attaining from jump difficulty, the points they're attaining from execution of quality on the spins, points they're attaining from artistic marks, all that kind of stuff. Wherever the data is available, we're using it to help our athletes understand where they have opportunities to gain. So the case study I'm going to show is from, I mentioned gymnastics. I've been working a lot with the men's team in the last year and a half. So our women have been doing great, knocking it out of the park. They've won the team gold medal in a number of recent Olympics and world championships. I'm starting to work with them now, and that opportunity was created by some of the work that we've had a chance to do with the men. So the situation with the men at the 2023 World Championships was coming into that. Our men had not won a team medal at an Olympics or a World since 2014. We did not win a medal at the 2022 World Championships. That meant we lost an early opportunity to qualify our team. Our big rival for that bronze medal was Great Britain, and out of the 6 apparatus that the men compete on, we only won 1 of those in the team event, and we tied 1. We lost both of the highest leverage events, and I'll talk about how I determine high leverage. And then in terms of difficulty, we had more difficulty. So gymnastics score, very simple, is basically difficulty points plus execution points. Difficulty is in theory uncapped, but a really good difficulty score in a gymnastics routine is 6 points. And execution is a maximum of 10. And the judges basically take deductions based on anything that's not perfect. You won't see a 10, or at least right now, you won't see a 10 in execution anymore because the level of detail that the judges are scrutinizing with is extraordinary right now. So a 9 on execution is amazing. And in a lot of apparatuses, like 8.5 is also really good. So in any case, difficulty, we actually had a little bit more than half a point more than Great Britain in that competition. We had more than 8 points higher in difficulty than Italy, which is a ton. And we were slightly behind China and a little over 2 points behind Japan. And that difficulty, that was a lot of progress over where we had been in Tokyo and going into that. So there was big focus in US gymnastics on developing difficulty. The problem was in 2022, execution. The way you can often tell the result of a team competition in gymnastics is how many major and minor disasters the team had. And I characterize a major disaster as an execution score less than 6.5, and a minor disaster as an execution score between 6.5 and 7.5. And you can see in 2022, we had 2 of each. Great Britain only had 1 major disaster and 1 minor, and we finished 1.5 points behind Great Britain. And then the rubbing salt in the wound was losing to Italy as well, despite having 8 more points in difficulty. And Italy was incredibly clean in the competition. They went for less difficulty, but only had 1 major disaster in every other routine out of the 18 that count against the score. They had an execution score of over 8, which is amazing. So we were asked several questions. In 2023, what were our chances of beating Great Britain? How close was the competition likely to be? Was our strategy of focusing on difficulty and then improving execution working? What were the highest leverage events? And then is live tracking of medal chances possible during a competition? Because in gymnastics, it can be challenging because some events typically have higher scores than others. And if different teams are on different apparatus at a given time, it can be hard to know how a team is really doing. So I came up with a way to track that during a competition in the way that you track win probability in like NFL as a game is going on. So what I did was I looked at the athletes that were going to be competing for Great Britain and USA. It's 5 athletes. The team final is what they call 3 up, 3 count. So 3 compete, all scores count. The team final score is just additive. It's the sum of all the scores that are achieved. And then our chances, according to my calculations, go, and I use data from the 2022 and 2023 season. And I used 10,000 Monte Carlo simulations to predict the win probability. For each athlete, I calculated their mean and standard deviation of score. I assumed a normal distribution. That's not perfect, but I've done some exploration of different distributions and I haven't found anything that reliably works better. So I stayed simple. And so we are 3 up, 3 count. And then going into the competition, I had us at 58% likelihood to beat Great Britain. I also looked at, so this is looking at the total scores, you know, how close was the competition likely to be? And I found that our mean going in was higher, but we had higher standard deviation, so higher variability. And then how close was the competition likely to be? You know, I could predict, you know, to give the team a sense, how close is it likely to be? I said 61% likely that it was going to be less than 3 points, which is relatively narrow. I also looked at, like, so this is how I determined the high leverage events. I looked at in my 10,000 simulations, what happened in the scenarios where we won and what happened in the scenarios where we lost, and looking at breaking it down by each of the 6 events. So it's PB is parallel bars, HB is high bar, FX floor exercise, vault, still rings, pommel horse. So the high leverage events were, the most high leverage were floor exercise and vault, but the other ones were relatively close. Actual results, our team won the bronze medal. 3 of the 5 guys were first timers at Worlds, so that was remarkable. We also won, Fred Richard won bronze in the individual all around, which hadn't happened in a long time, and Koi Young won 2 medals in the individual events, which was amazing. So then looking at our team finals results, you know, looking in terms of major and minor disasters, our guys executed really well. We only had 1 minor disaster, which was a lot better than Great Britain and Italy did, and that's how we won the competition. Our total score was up almost 7 points, and all of that came from execution. So that was confirmation that our strategy of difficulty and then cleaning it up was working. That was really promising. And yeah, we won, we won the 3 most likely events that we would win, and then we were close on the other one. So that's how we beat Great Britain by almost 3 points. This is the win probability graph. So I talked about, like, just like in the NFL, what I did was I I basically took my model as each result was determined. I put that into the model as a determined result, and then recalculated the win probability. So you can see how that tracks over time, even with us and Great Britain on different events at different times. So this gives us a chance of where we are and how different performances affect that win probability. So it's all how an athlete performs relative to what's expected. Several applications, I think, to other sports are possible. You know, pretty much any individual event where there's a score or a result, a distance, a height, etc. I think this can be applied. It can also be used for relays where you're looking at the sum of a bunch of variable inputs to determine a possible outcome. And that's that. Thank you for texting me. How long do I have for questions?
Oh, 3 seconds.
Oh, great. Okay, who wants to ask a 3-second question? Kwang.
No, you have 5 minutes. That was 18 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
For the ELO rating stuff, do you also do the analysis at the within competition level, or just look at between competition level? In other words, do you have like the tracking data within like those races, for example, swimming and like running, etc.? ELO rating stuff.
We just track based on the results in the competition. So where an athlete placed relative to all the other athletes.
Okay.
So basically, if I beat you, I get points from you. If you beat me, you get points from me. If you're the underdog and you beat someone who's a favorite, you get more points than if you're the favorite. And we just adjust based on every international competition for which we pull results in.
Was there analysis that
Nick.
went into the strategy of, I imagine there's like an optimal difficulty to execution like level, and you were mentioning that we went from more difficult. Basically execution at one point was kind of lacking.
Correct.
I imagine if you have less difficulty, it's easier to get good at execution. Is there analysis that went into that decision, or is that like stuff that you guys are going to do in the future?
Yeah, we've done a little bit. So what Nick asked about was basically the weighing difficulty versus execution and what's the right balance. And that's actually one of the key things in my work. So I judge figure skating, and so I work with a lot of the judged sports. The way all these sports are judged or scored, it's basically a risk-reward balance. So it's something we're working on, Nick. We're not there yet, but it's definitely something we think about is how well can an athlete execute the amount of difficulty, you know, to achieve the highest
maximum final score. But what we found in Tokyo was we were so behind on difficulty that there was no hope of catching up. And that's why the mandate came to like do more difficult skills and then we'll get better at them. And also Russia followed that formula in Tokyo and that helped them win. So we took that playbook and applied it. Yeah. Money.
So there's also this play between difficulty and execution in diving.
It's something we're looking at as well. We're not there yet, but it's sort of a similar story. I mean, the points are calculated somewhat differently. In diving, the degree of difficulty is multiplied by the execution score as opposed to added. So that changes things a little bit, as Greg helped us understand. But it's something, I mean, we're looking at it in all of our judge sports. Like artistic swimming just implemented a system very much like these other sports last year. They moved from holistic marking to a point system. And just based on the way it was initially set up, we found that you basically had to max out on difficulty to be competitive. So our coaches bravely did that. And that basically took us from not qualifying for the last Olympics and not qualifying for the last several into a medal contender for this coming Olympics. But artistic swimming, and I'm actually part of a consultancy group that's looking at it, is actually looking at adjusting the different point values in order to restore some of the artistry to artistic swimming. Yeah, what's your first name? Oh, Rosie, hi.
Just also follow up about the Elo rating. Have you tried other rating like a true skill rating, like just cognitive stuff?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. Like all this ELO stuff was developed by a colleague of mine named Dan Webb, working together with Professor Mark Glickman at Harvard and some of his students. So I don't know if they tried a true skill rating or not, or I know they've tried Glicko because of Mark Glickman, and some of that work has come into our method of doing like multi-competitor events, you know, which is an adaptation of the head-to-head. But I don't know if we tried true skill. Yeah, it's a good question. I'll look into that. Sean.
Yeah, I was curious when you're talking about the high leverage events. Do you also take into account, like, we kind of just looked at the example of Great Britain head to head, but
Yeah.
you know, in the Olympics, obviously, there are a lot more countries. That let's say like a bronze position. Do we take those other countries into account, or would it be difficult to do so?
I mean, it's possible. I was trying to make the problem as simple as possible because based on all previous data, like it was very clear that we weren't going to be beating Japan or China on any day. And the teams below us were very unlikely to beat us. So I focused on the Great Britain head to head. But, you know, I mean, going into the games now in Paris, you know, I'll look at who I think is close, and that's what I'll focus my analysis on. But we're also developing a tool that will enable us to do this a lot more automatically than the horribly embarrassing manual way that I'm doing it now. Yeah, good question, Sean.
Do you think there was was there a difference or like different strategy employed for optimizing for a team in that head-to-head matchup versus optimizing for like highest total team score? Was there a difference in like the way that you formed the team?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in gymnastics, you know, it's an additive score. So again, it's 3 routines on each apparatus. So it's 18 scores that count. It doesn't matter where you get your points. Like every point is equal, whether, you know, regardless of which apparatus or whether it comes from difficulty or execution. So the team is selected based on who can produce the highest score. Like we're not selecting the team based on a consideration of other countries. But when we are, you know, coaching our athletes, developing our athletes, we're certainly looking at what's going on out there and seeing what it takes for us to be competitive. But once it gets to the point where at US championships or Olympic trials, it's only about our athletes and what can maximize our score. Augustus.
Some like events and all around scores, like are you trying to maximize for medals achieved in events, and like do under leveraged events tend to be like you should select for athletes there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Augustus asked, basically that was the essence of the data challenge. Yeah. So the data challenge is all about like, so gymnastics has, in the men's, there are 8 different medal events. The women have 6, right? It's team, individual all-around, and then all the individual events. We've historically, I'll say, overemphasized the team medal and optimized for that. And I've said to anyone who will listen, like, that's one medal. And especially in the case like Tokyo, where we were never going to beat China, Japan, or Russia in the team final, we should have selected a bunch of guys who could make the individual event finals. Now that we've won the team medal at the last World Championships, I think the team medal has resurfaced as a very important possibility for us. But that was a big question that I wanted the folks doing the data challenge to answer for us was, how do we maximize for total medals as opposed to for just the team? Yeah, so go to the poster session today. Great work was done.
Please, let's stay.
I'm done. I'm done. Yes, I'm done. Thank you, everybody. As I said earlier, come talk to me.
Yes, very good. Okay, we have one of the speakers. We have Lulu Zheng from Yale, and she's going to talk about optimizing team selection and strategy for the swimming mixed doubles.
Yeah, here you go.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Does this work for the mic?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And then just click anywhere. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you for the intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Lulu. So for context, this is a swimming project that I did senior year of undergrad, already graduated, but senior year of undergrad in collaboration with Professor Brian McDonald and Dr. Elliot Schwartz. For background, I grew up swimming, was very bad at it, unfortunately, but so this project was really exciting to me because it's a combination of not having to swim, but being involved in the swim world. So super excited to be here today. Thank you for coming. So starting with some background on the left-hand side, as you may know, the US has some of the world's best individual swimmers, Michael Phelps, Caleb Dressel, many, many gold medals. Unfortunately, in the 2021 Tokyo Summer Olympics, Team USA actually placed 5th in the 4x100 mixed medley relay. The mixed medley relay is a newer swim event, so not a lot of data out there for this event, but essentially involves 2 men, 2 women, back, breast, fly free, 100 meters of each stroke. And the interesting part of this race is you get to pick which combination you want to swim. So there's lots of possibilities. Different countries do different things. We placed 5th. Everyone thought we were going to do really well. So this was very sad news. And that is kind of the motivation for my project. What is then the optimal lineup strategy for the 4x100 mixed medley relay? Specifically, who are the 2 men and 2 women who should swim it and which order? So to answer this question, 2 main data sets that we looked at here. The first one, Olympic swimming data provided by Elliot, thank you. So this was definitely my main data set. It spans 3,000 swimmers, nearly 3,000 swimmers across the 8 100-meter individual legs. So this is not really data, just individual swims, 4 men's, 4 women's, back, breast, fly free. We looked at the data specifically for swimmers who swam in 2021 or later. The rationale here is if you're a competitive swimmer and you're very good, you're going to the Olympics, if you didn't swim in the 2021 Olympics or in 2021 at all, you're probably not, unfortunately, going to compete in the 2024 Olympics. So just basically subsetting it to the swimmers who are most relevant. And then also, if you only had 1 swim time throughout the 6 years, you're also probably not going to go to the 2024 Olympics. And as predicted, the swimmers who only had 1 time did have slower times compared to the rest of the group. So basically, this is just taking the swimmers that are most likely actually going to the 2024 Olympics. The second data set here, very, very small, but essentially we scraped the limited mixed medley relay data that we did have from the various most recent world champs that did actually do the mixed medley. So very, very small data set. Definitely this was the main thing. One more thing to note, it says 2022, but I actually did this project in first half of 2022. So most of the data is up until 2021. So now I just wanted to go through some of the preliminary trends that we found in the data. So starting on the left-hand side here, this is a graph looking at swimmer age and then average swimmer time. In this case, we're looking at women's 100 free, but the same trends apply to all of the events that we see here. So this is basically showing, as assumed, there is an age curve in swimming, like many other sports, where swimmers tend to get faster up until a certain age, and then they either get slower or likely retire. So that's just confirming that there is that happening here as well. On the right-hand side, we have the session description. So whether it was a prelim, a semi, or a final, the swim was one of those. And then once again, the average swim time. What this is saying is finals, swimmers in final sessions tend to swim faster than prelims, which makes sense. They try harder, it's the finals. The semi one is a little bit surprising. I would not read too much into this. We had very little data for the semifinals, so this is likely just like a faster subset of the data, but definitely way more data for prelim and finals, and the trend makes sense for these two. So moving on here, on the left-hand side, we have the meet type. We categorize meet type as either an Olympic trial, an Olympic game, a world championship, or anything else. So in this case, what this is showing us is swimmers tend to swim faster in Olympic games and world championships rather than trials or literally any other meet, which makes sense. The Olympic trials and world champs are iconic, very global swim events, so it makes sense that they would swim faster there. On the right-hand side, this is using the very limited relay data that we had. It essentially just looks at the swims that were part of the mixed medley relay versus an individual swim. And this trend might be surprising because it shows that a relay swim is, decently faster than an individual leg. This was only like maybe 20 data points, so not probably super representative. It is true though that some swimmers and relays can swim faster. It is a relay dynamic, so it's probably, the difference though is probably not this egregious in real swims. Cool. So the last graph here is looking at the swim meet year over time and then the average swim time. This one I found interesting because at least on the news, I tend to see articles of new swimmers like breaking records very frequently in the individual swims. What this is saying is while there may be these like unicorns, overall as a whole, these swimmers tend to remain pretty steady over time, year over year, with the exception of when COVID hit. So in 2020, beginning, COVID-ish. So I think that cohort are the people who were already really good swimmers. So they probably had more access to pools. So you do see the average time decreasing a little bit. And there aren't as many swims in 2020 either. And then in 2021, when there's more recovery, we see the swimmers maybe readjusting to post-COVID swims. So it goes up a little bit. And then 2022, we didn't have much data, so we'll not count that too much. But essentially the story here is it actually stays pretty steady over time, the average times. So the next few slides here are walking through how we essentially took all that data, all those trends to answer the question posed at the beginning, what is the optimal relay lineup strategy? So the first thing we did here is build a model. So we fit a linear regression model for each event and gender combination. So 8 models total, 8 events. And as for the model itself, these are some of the details. So as seen from the slides, the outcome variable that we really want to predict here is the swim time for a swimmer. And then these are the various predictor variables that we did have. I won't go over them since we just went over them in the slides, but the only additional one is the unique swimmer ID, so we can account for swimmer-to-swimmer differences, since some swimmers are just faster overall than others. So this was a model we used. And then going back to the methodology here, so once we had a model for every event and every gender combo, then we predicted swim times for each swimmer under specific conditions that we designated. And these conditions are either 2021 or 2024 Olympics. It had to be a final race, a relay, and then the swimmer's age. So built the model and then fed the model all these conditions to get the predicted swim times. The second box line here is basically us using the model to then simulate individual swims. So we constructed normal distributions for each swimmer and event using the model's mean and standard deviation of the predicted times. And then we simulated each event using this. So basically it's like each swimmer swam their race 1,000 times. And so because we have these 1,000 simulations, we can then rank them over their 1,000 simulations by taking the average. So then for each event, we have basically 1 to however many swimmers there are, their ranking overall. So this is an example of, I think this is women's 100 3. So we have each swimmer, and there are many more swimmers in this. It's just the top 20-ish maybe. And then the average time overall is basically their average of the 1,000 simulated swims. And then last column, their rank. So basically that allows us to find the fastest swimmers in every single event. Then next 2 boxes here really have to do with the relays. So now that we have the fastest swimmers, we took the top 5 from each country for each of the 8 events, and then constructed all possible relay combinations that we could using the top 5 swimmers. The only 2 real criteria we have here are the swimmers can't repeat, as the rules of the mixed medley relay, and then it has to be 2 men and 2 women. But other than that, all combinations are on the table using the top 5 swimmers. The top 5 is just because my laptop couldn't handle more than that, so had to restrict it. And then finally, we can now calculate the relay stats by looking at the individual legs. So the average relay time then is just the sum of the individual leg averages, and then the variance, since they're independent swimmers, are just the sum of the individual leg variances as well. So then using the relay average and relay variance, we can then rank the relay combinations based on their summed average. So then the last step here is just really looking at now relay simulations. We've built all the relay combinations, we have the predicted averages, now we can simulate them. So we took the fastest relay combination from every country based on the averages, and then all possible US combinations because we care the most about the US in this case, and then simulated each relay combination 1,000 times based on the stats we just calculated. So after we do that, you can then calculate each relay combination's probability of winning 1st to 16th place based on the number of times that each combination placed that rank throughout the 1,000 simulations. So I know that's a lot. I think the more interesting part is the actual results. So we built the results of these simulations in kind of a 4-parter in an application. The first section here, so this is the actual mixed medley relay in the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. So the leftmost column has a country, and then the next series are kind of like the swimmers. So back swimmer, the name, and then the actual back time is what they actually swam at the Olympics. The simulated back time is what our model predicted after the simulations. And then, yeah, and then it goes breast, fly, free. So the actual total relay time is the actual results of these 8 countries. And then the simulated average total relay time is our simulated times. The actual rank is what they actually placed. So you see the US in 5th place. And then we'll start with the last column here, the simulated rank overall. This is basically, because we had all the combinations and we ranked them, this is essentially how that specific combination placed in comparison to all the simulated combinations. So the higher the number, like the worse they did in our predictions. The lower the number, the better they did in our predictions. So you can see our model isn't perfect. Like for example, Great Britain placed 1st, and we originally thought them to be do worse than China. We thought China would win, but in general, you see that the teams that placed worse tend to have higher numbers, and the teams that placed better tend to have lower numbers. So directionally, it is validating it. What's most interesting here is the simulated rank within country column. What this is saying is comparing how each combination did in comparison to that country's combinations. So most of the numbers are really low here, indicating that most countries use their top, even 1 to like top 5 combinations. What stands out is the US, according to our predictions, use their 61st fastest combination. So a lot of people like China and Italy use their top combination, and they did well. And the US did not. Australia, people also thought Australia would place pretty well, and we see that they use their 13th fastest combination according to our simulations. Sorry? Oh, got it faster. 13th fastest combination. So I think this just shows that we did not use our most optimal combination here. Cool. So this second slide looks at the top 10 fastest relay combinations per country. So if we didn't use our best combination, what would be our best combination? This, you can, in the little clicker at the top here, basically you can select any country that you're interested in, and it'll spit out the top 10 fastest combinations. In this case, I will read out the names, but number 1 there would be our top combination. I will caveat that this whole project in general relies heavily on historical data. So since we only have historical data up until really 2021, if I were to redo this project using 2022, 2023 data, I definitely think a lot of these names would change. So I won't stand by these names, but I'll stand by the general methodology. So these would basically be our top 10. What's interesting here is this is the top 10 within our country, and then these are the ranks overall. Essentially, this is saying, because these two columns are the same, it's saying that like if we had used any of our top 10 fastest US combinations, we basically would have won overall. But we used our 61st, so we did not win. And then this slide looks at basically a race of the most elite or the fastest. So it takes every country's fastest relay combination and then races them. We only have like the top 8, maybe 10 here. But if we had raced our fastest combination, every other country had raced their fastest combination, we still would have likely won. And then finally, this is probably the most interesting tool. So I think it's really great to have the predicted fastest relay combination for every country. But unfortunately, sometimes you're just not able to race those specific swimmers due to health reasons. Maybe there's a scheduling reason. So what this tool does is you can essentially select a swimmer. This is for the US only, but you can select a swimmer from each stroke, so back breast fly free, and then simulate how well that combination would have done against all other countries' fastest combination. So in this case, I think I picked a random combination. We would not have done as well. I think we would have placed 7th in this case, compared to every other country's fastest combination. This is probably the most helpful tool because just having the fastest combination can only do so much. This is a more like flexible and versatile tool. So this is a thing I think biggest takeaway from this. But again, it really relies on historical data, and we don't have the most recent historical data. But yeah. Okay. How much time? Okay, cool. Okay, I'm done. Yeah, but thank you. Yeah, that's it. I want to thank Elliot and Brian again for helping me with this project. Yeah, I'll take any questions.
So maybe I'm missing something, but
yeah.
I didn't really get why do we need like Monte Carlo. So you're fitting a normal distribution using the average.
Yes.
Right? So the simulated data also like will preserve the order of magnitude on like alongside of those ranks.
Yeah.
So why do we really need the Monte Carlo simulation? Instead, we could do a constraint optimization, linear optimization problem on like the average, and choose the best like subset that like minimize the time.
Yeah, you're saying why do we even need to like simulate and just use like the linear regression? Yeah, that's a good point. I think so. Essentially, here like swimming seems to have like a little bit more. Well, okay, I'll start with this. If you just use the linear regression model, the results aren't as accurate because in general, especially with relays, there's a lot more variance potentially. It's individual swimmers, and depending on reaction times, I think there's a lot more change in the potential outcomes. So the simulations was designed to hopefully capture more of that variability and change rather than just relying on one answer from the model. It's a good question though. But yes, so once we found that we simulated more, the results that we were trying to predict came closer to the actual 2021 Tokyo Olympic results rather than relying on just the model.
I think I was thinking the same thing about like you want this variability.
Yeah.
So would you recommend you have a team that is pretty good on average but has really low variability?
Yeah.
Or would you rather have a really fast team that has really high variability? Where it's like you could win and be fastest.
Yeah.
Or you could just be the worst.
Right. That's a good question. I think that's why we tried to incorporate the probabilities more. We actually went up all the way to 16th place. So I guess in combinations where you see the probability of ranking first, because it takes into account the variance in calculating that, if that's really high, then maybe you have more confidence in that combination. If the probability of ranking first and second or third are very close to each other, then maybe it's not as confident of a call. But yeah.
I noticed on your slide where you had the USA teams that the freestyle swimmer was the same for every single
Yes.
one of them. I don't know if you had a comment on that.
Yeah.
That needs
Yes.
to be on this team.
Yes, yeah, I know. Actually, I think it's interesting because the U.S. did, the U.S. actually did really well in a somewhat recent mixed medley relay, so we've clearly redeemed ourselves. The swimmers that I think I did check the swimmers that they used. They were younger swimmers, and they were some of the fastest swimmers. They weren't included in here because at the time their swim times weren't as fast. But I agree, like I think it clearly shows that she's very talented. Yes.
Do you think you'd have any recommendations for like if you were a worse country? I mean, I get if you work for the USA, Team USA, so you probably wouldn't want to help them. But like if you were a worse country and you can like the only way they could medal would be like some combination of swimmers that's like has a really high variability, and then you need like basically a miracle to happen.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. What would your like recommendation? Sorry, I'm American. So.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think if you're already swimming, I think if you're already swimming poorly, you don't have like that much to lose. So you might as well try the predicted fastest combination, even if it doesn't let you win, because I guess if your current approach is playing the safer swimmers that have lower variance but score worse, it's not working so far. So you might as well try something more wild. But luckily we're the US, so we don't have that problem. Thank you.